Good evening, everybody. Shalom. I'm Rabbi Dovid Vigler. Please post if you're able to hear me. Would love to make sure that I'm being heard. Shalom Fariba. Nice to meet you. Hi, everybody. Welcome to 8 o'clock on Thursday night. This is Paradigm Shift, flagship course of the Jewish Learning Institute, and I'm deeply honored to be here tonight, sharing this extraordinary wisdom of the Rebbe with you. My name is Rabbi Dovid Vigler of Chabad of Palm Beach Gardens. That's in Florida. And I'm honored to be here tonight to learn with you 6 transformational ideas of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Hi, Mickey. My president, nice to see you. Shalom Fariba. We're going to take on this journey. It's going to be a very exciting journey, taking full advantage of the circumstances in which we find ourselves, to be able to teach Torah and bring light and wisdom and godliness and holiness to even more people than we could have, if not for this pandemic, if not for this coronavirus, taking advantage of Facebook Live and of the JLI feed, of the JLI platform, of Facebook. It is truly an honor for me to be here amongst so many scholars from around the world, people who've come together to study Torah, people who take their Judaism seriously, who want to take it to the next level. I'm humbled to be here with you tonight and to help you through this extraordinary journey of getting to meet my Rebbe, our Rebbe, the leader of our generation. So nice to see everybody here. Shalom, Stephanie. And without any further ado, I'm going to go straight into it. Again, my name is Rabbi Dovid Vigler of Chabad of Palm Beach Gardens in Florida. I'm honored to be here tonight to present to you Paradigm Shift, a 6-week series starting tonight, running for 6 consecutive Thursday evenings at 8 p.m. Tonight's class, the session, the entire series is called Paradigm Shift. It's about getting to know our Rebbe. The Rebbe is the Moses of our generation. We're commemorating his 26th yahrzeit next week. The Rebbe passed on the 3rd of Tammuz, 1994, and his influence is just extraordinary. He's undoubtedly the most influential leader of our generation, and probably for many generations before that. As much as we have heard about the Rebbe, as much as we've been touched by the Rebbe and the more than 5,000 Chabad houses across the world, how much do we really know about this extraordinary individual? The Rebbe is the heart of Chabad, and the heart of the Rebbe is his Torah, is his relationship with God. What this course is about, Paradigm Shift, is about our ability, our exposure to be able to get to know the Rebbe, this extraordinary Jewish leader, beyond his charisma, beyond his menschlichkeit, to be able to touch into the profundity of his wisdom, to get a glimpse of his Weltanschauung, to be able to see how the Rebbe sees the world. It is something so inspirational. It is something so extraordinarily meaningful. What we're going to be covering in the next 6 weeks, starting tonight, 6 sessions where we're going to be exposed to a paradigm shift, to the Rebbe's paradigm shift on how the Rebbe saw things differently to how they are ordinarily seen. Tonight we're going to be redefining the world, how we view the world and its elements, the harshest elements of this world, including hardship, struggle, and suffering. Next week in Lesson 2, we're going to be redefining the Jew. Lesson 3, redefining Torah and its relationship to the world. In Lesson 4, redefining religion and leadership. In Lesson 5, redefining failure and sin. And in lesson 6 of this course, Paradigm Shift, right here on facebook.com/myjli, we're going to be talking about the redefining of redemption, of Mashiach, and the current reality of our world. But this all begins right here tonight. I'm Rabbi Dovid Vigler of Chabad of Palm Beach Gardens, privileged to be your host, teaching you, bringing to you the wisdom of our Rebbe, the Moses of our generation. What we're going to be learning tonight is effectively 3 paradigm shifts that will change the way that you deal with the things that hurt you most. Imagine being able to have the strength of character, the moral fortitude, the fortress mentality, to be able to confront your problems, your pain, proactively, to be able to maintain mind over heart, to be able to maintain tranquility, serenity, and peace of mind through the harshest realities that life throws at us. That is what we're going to experience tonight in lesson 1 of Paradigm Shift. 3 paradigm shifts that will change the way that you deal with the things that hurt you most. You know, if a couple is in therapy, they've got a choice. They can either deal with the individual issues, he said, she said, or they could reassess their entire approach to relationships. If they were to reassess their entire approach to relationships, the latter, then most likely the individual problems would probably just disappear. We know that if you've got a skin problem, you can either deal with it topically, or you could take a pill, which would change the bloodstream, cure the bloodstream, and automatically all of the topical skin problems will go away all on their own. Our goal tonight is to experience a paradigm shift to allow us to find the positive in everything around us. To be able to see the world around us that looks like total chaos, anarchy, and to find the chorus within the chaos. That's our goal tonight. But to do that, to be able to find the positive in everything, doesn't merely require a subjective interpretation of the facts, but rather an objective understanding of reality, an ability to see deeper, to take that iceberg, put on your scuba gear, and to go down deep, to be able to see what really lies beneath the surface. The Rebbe was known in many of the videos that we've seen. It's actually my father and mother-in-law that were the founders of GEM, the Jewish educational media that brought the videos of the Rebbe to the world. In those videos, we can see the Rebbe as an extraordinary optimist. But it's not just that the Rebbe was a natural optimist. It's so much more than that, which allowed the Rebbe to have a positive view on literally everything, which is what we're aspiring towards tonight. The Rebbe was more than a natural optimist. The Rebbe is a tzaddik with X-ray vision, seeing through to the essence of everything. It's not based on a subjective choice on how to view reality, but on a deeper choice, an ability to see more than meets the eye. It's not just about being optimistic, it's about having your glasses adjusted to the proper focus, to be able to look in through those binoculars with the correct focus to see what's really going on. Because if we can have the courage, the wisdom, and the strength and the humility to be able to see more than meets the eye, we'll be able to see what the Rebbe sees. And when we can reach that level, everything changes. That's our goal tonight. On lesson 1 of Paradigm Shift is 3 paradigm shifts that will change the way that you deal with the things that hurt you most. You know, we often hear about heaven being good, God being good, angels being good, but it's very rare for us to hear about this world, terra firma, this world being good. It's unusual to associate goodness with this world, which seems so dysfunctional, such anarchy. Yet we, and there are many Jewish people that have chosen to literally bury their heads in the sand, and they'll focus on God, they'll focus on Torah, they'll focus on the yeshiva, they'll focus on the shul and the sanctuary, and they'll turn their backs on the world. And that's one approach to life. But the Chabad approach, the Rebbe's approach to life, is taking literally the biblical command to Adam and Eve when they were first created and given their mission statement in the Garden of Eden was la'avda or l'shamra, to work the garden and to protect the garden. And we are tasked, we as human beings were tasked with engaging with the world, not just ignoring it, to guard it and to protect it. For us to be able to do that, we need to have a positive attitude on life. Our souls need to be on fire, to be able to see the goodness in everything instead of being overwhelmed by all the chaos and the anarchy around us, to be able to see the chorus instead of the chaos. We need to be able to be higher, to be able to see deeper. Tonight's discussion is based on one big idea. It's on the Rebbe's groundbreaking approach to the world, to life, to everything around us. That what you see is not what you get. You see, when we look at the world around us, the world can easily look like a jungle, anarchy and chaos. I'm going to quote to you from a very famous talk that the Rebbe gave in 1972. When we look about with physical eyes, we only perceive the physical aspects in all that we see. And we naturally wonder, what is happening with the world? The situation is steadily deteriorating from one generation to the next, and even from 1 year to the next. Goodness does not prevail. Conditions are not improving. Holy and spiritual values do not dominate. This is especially true with regard to Jewish concerns. I mean, think about it. We don't even have... The nations of the world don't even recognize our right to have our own country in 2020. Our nation has always been a small minority amongst the world's inhabitants, and this is certainly the case today. Such thoughts easily lead to the conclusion that this world is but a jungle, dominated by vicious animals, and that it certainly does not remotely resemble a garden that yields edible fruit. Such thoughts also lead to dejection and despair. How can we hope to affect and change the world for the better if the situation is consistently degenerating? If we reach this conclusion, this is the Rebbe's words in 1972 that I read from. If we reach this conclusion, even if we dutifully obey and continue to study Torah and we do good deeds, we still do mitzvahs, we will lack the zest and the happiness that is necessary in order to fulfill our mission and properly serve God, inasmuch as it appears that we will certainly fail. For the world is no more than a wild jungle ruled by vicious beasts. At the outset, at face value, the world around us seems like total chaos. How on earth can we find the goodness, the good in a world which is so disheveled, disorganized, and so chaotic, so contrary to our values? How can we experience any peace of mind, any serenity in such a crazy world? But the Rebbe's revolution was, what you see is not what you get. You've got to be able to look deeper. And deeper is in the blueprints of the universe. Deeper is in the Torah. Our sages tell us that just like a house needs to be built with engineering plans and architectural plans, so too this universe was built by God with a set of plans, of architectural plans. And that set of plans, that is the Torah. When we open up the Torah, specifically in the Song of Songs, King Solomon tells us in Song of Songs, chapter 5, verse 1, a game-changing perspective on everything that we see. Though this world looks like a jungle, it's not. This world is in fact a magnificent garden. His words of King Solomon in the Torah, Basi legani achoisi kala, I have come to my garden, my sister, my bride. This is a reference to the revelation of the Torah, of God, revealing himself at Mount Sinai to the Jewish people who had just returned, who just came out of Egypt. And God is now returning, revealing himself in this world after having been exiled, self-exiled from the Garden of Eden by Adam and Eve. When God returns to this world, he says, I've come to my garden, my sister, my bride. God calls this world a garden. This world is not the jungle that it seems. This world is in fact a magnificent, orderly, structured garden. Indeed, the Torah tells us, when God created the world, Vayar Elokim et kol asher asa, behold, God, and God saw everything that he had created, Vehine tov ma'od, it was very, very good. God saw that this world was very good, and the Torah testifies to that specific point. So even though the world looks like it's crazy, like it's lost its mind, like we don't know what's going to be tomorrow, what's going to be next year, nobody can plan anything anymore. In fact, there is a chorus to what seems like a chaos. There is a conductor that's keeping everything in order. And in fact, the Rebbe explains that this is not just subjective good. When he says that this world is good and he saw that everything was very good, it's not just subjective good, it's objectively good. The Rebbe continues in that same talk, he says, we must know that the world is a garden. I quote from the Rebbe's words in 1972. Not just a field that yields grain, which is necessary to subsist, but a garden that yields not just necessities, but luxuries. Fruits, luxurious fruits. Fruits that provide enjoyment and pleasure. Moreover, the pleasure provided by a given entity is subjective, its extent determined by the needs and taste of its owner. Normally you'd say, in Hebrew we say, al tam vareach en nitvakeach, you can't argue about taste and flavor, but when it comes to God's declaring this world a garden which produces luxurious fruits, that's on God's scale. This world is not just anyone's garden, it is God's garden, as the verse states, quotes the Rebbe, I have come to my garden, its goodness is therefore measured according to God's infinite terms, objective and infinite terms. What's the logic here? How is it that the Rebbe is able to say that the world which seems so chaotic is really a chorus? That this world which seems like such a jungle is really a structured and beautiful, majestic and magnificent garden? How is that possible? There's a svara here, friends. A svara means a logical explanation. The logical explanation of this truth is based upon the doctrine of continuous creation, the doctrine of perpetual creation. This, my friends, is a founding principle of Chabad philosophy. It's introduced to us by the founder of Chabad, by the Alter Rebbe, quoting the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, where the Alter Rebbe explains this principle that God didn't just create the world and then went off to the Bahamas to a vacation for the next 6,000 years, but that God is hands-on involved in every single detail of the universe at every single moment in time. Without getting into the nuances of the doctrine of perpetual creation, suffice it as the need for God to create the universe at every single moment anew in order for it to continue to exist. If God was to stop creating the world for even a single moment, then the world would return to a state in which it was before creation, a state of non-existence, a state of nothing. The nature of everything is to return to its natural state of being, unless there's an external force making it do otherwise. So the natural state of everything is to return to a state of nothingness, which is what it was before creation. The only way that something goes from a state of nothing to a state of something to existence is only because God is creating the universe anew at every single moment in time, all over again. This principle, friends, is something which we affirm each and every single day, twice, not once, but twice, in our daily prayers. We say, in His goodness, God renews each day continuously the work of creation. God renews the work of creation every single day continuously, as it says in Psalms 136 from the Torah. Give thanks to him who makes great luminaries, for his kindness is eternal. Now, friends, this principle, this doctrine of perpetual creation changes everything. This doctrine is something that changes our perception of everything. Because what we've just realized is that God didn't just create the world and then took a vacation, but God created the world and continues to create the world at every single moment in time, which means that right now at this moment, God is creating Hamas, and God is creating Hezbollah, and God is creating the coronavirus at every single moment right here, right now. And if he was to stop for even an instant, then it would cease to exist. Now, God, we know, is good. Teva hatoiv lehetiv. God is the nature of goodness, to do kindness to his creations. That's another founding principle of Hasidic thought, of Chabad philosophy, is that God, of the Torah really, is that God is good. And since God is engaged with the universe at every single moment in time, perforce we must conclude that the good God is creating everything at every single moment in time. This is what's going to be the key here, to allow us to find the goodness in everything. Even the dysfunctional, even the chaotic, even what seems like anarchy. We tonight are going to find the 3 paradigm shifts that are going to change the way that you deal with the things that hurt you most, based on this one principle, the doctrine of perpetual creation, the fact that God, who is exclusively good, is creating and engaged with the universe at every single moment in time. You see that verse, which I just quoted, quoted the verse in Psalms 136 as it is said, God, give thanks to him who makes great luminaries, for his kindness is eternal. For his kindness is eternal. God's kindness is eternal. His goodness is eternal. But the word eternal in Hebrew is le'olam, which means eternal and also means for the world. The word is ki le'olam chasdo, which literally translates as for his kindness is to the world. God made himself present to the world. He made his kindness present to the world. It's there. God's goodness, God's kindness, God's benevolence, his magnanimity is present in every single nuance within the universe. It's there. We just need to dig a little bit to be able to find it. Now, with this approach, the doctrine of perpetual creation, we're introduced to the idea that God, who is good, is engaged with the universe at all times. There's not a moment when God is not engaged in the world. In fact, if God wanted to destroy the world, all he would need to do is stop. If God wanted to destroy this world, he would simply need to do nothing. He needs to recreate the world at every single moment in time. The fact that I exist right now, the fact that you exist on this Facebook Live feed right now, means that God is creating you at this very moment. God, who is exclusively good, is creating you and me at this very moment, which means there is goodness in every single experience, encounter, and in every single locale and moment in this universe. We've got a bit of a problem with this, however. I know what you're thinking. You say, okay, Rabbi Vigler, so God is good and God is creating the world at every single moment. Very nice. But our experience tells us otherwise. There's a lot of dysfunction out there. And if you think about it, you'll realize that there's stuff out there that's just downright evil. For starters, we have our evil inclination. We have a evil inclination inside of us, a yetzer hara, a desire for evil that wants to seduce and tempt and lead us astray from God. So clearly there is negative energy in this world. How could that be good? How can I find goodness in everything? Our goal tonight in Paradigm Shift Lesson 1 is to find goodness in everything, to go from chaos to chorus. Our goal tonight is to find the 3 paradigm shifts that will change the way that you deal with the things that hurt you most. There are things out there that hurt us. There is from the inside, we've got dysfunction, which is our evil instinct. And then there is evil around us. There's struggle. There's challenges. There's obstacles. There's competitors. There's enemies out there. And what about suffering? Can we find the goodness in suffering? Can you imagine if tonight, in the next 40 minutes or so, we can leave this class tonight with a proactive approach to suffering, a proactive approach to challenge and to obstacles and to hardship. Imagine if we could experience a paradigm shift, which would change the way that we approach suffering, approach challenge, and approach sin. That is my goal tonight in this lesson of paradigm shift. Stay with me. You see, the basic premise here is that God is exclusively good and God is constantly engaged with this universe at every single moment in time. This world could not exist if God abandoned the world for a mere instant. It would simply revert to its state of nothingness from which it originated before creation. God is good only. And God continuously creates this world all the time. With that perspective, the Rebbe teaches us that there is goodness all around us. If you don't see it, it means you got to dig a little deeper. If you know that it's there, it's much more likely for you to find it. Let me just share with you how the Rebbe expressed this thought. He said, with this perspective, the knowledge that the world is not a jungle, but a garden, because God is the landscaper, because God is present all of the time. With this perspective, we view the world differently. And when we do so, we begin to notice things that we missed upon first glance. When we realize that it is our responsibility to constantly be on the search, we endeavor to look around us and perceive that which is beneath the shell, the fruit that is under the peel. We are confident that we will successfully uncover the garden that is latent in creation because the Torah tells us that it is indeed there waiting to be discovered. So you know that there's gold, you just got to dig a little bit. The knowledge that we will surely find precious fruit that God says are a part of the garden in which He dwells, infuses us with supreme confidence and enthusiasm. Knowing that a precious treasure awaits discovery, we remain focused on the task and do not allow ourselves to be sidetracked by our endeavors. We must know, and this is the kicker, friends, we must know, the Rebbe says, that we inhabit a wonderful world. The world looks dysfunctional. The world looks like chaos. The world looks like anarchy. But the Rebbe says, no, what you see is not what you get. We must know that we inhabit a wonderful world. The evil inclination endeavors in every way possible. The evil inclination endeavors in every way possible to obscure the world's preciousness, in the hope that we lose all hope, God forbid, or at least to lull us into doing the bare required minimum. Through contemplating the above, however, we assuredly traverse through life, secure in the knowledge that we will find the fruits of God's garden. You know, if your wife serves you a dinner and it looks horrible, you don't say that it looks horrible. You dig deep and you put it in your mouth because you love her and you know she loves you, and you trust her and you know she trusts you, and you know that this food must be good. It doesn't look good, it doesn't smell good, but it doesn't matter. You put it in your mouth because you know that deep down, more than meets the eye, this is good. And that's our approach to this world, which looks so dysfunctional. When we know that God is present in every single moment, friends, including this moment, even during this coronavirus, even during this national election, even during all the chaos, the anti-Semitism and the riots and everything else that's going on, when we have the humility to say, God, I don't see you, but I know that you're there. Because without you, this world wouldn't exist. The doctrine of perpetual creation. With that approach, we experience the paradigm shift. We know that there's goodness somewhere here I know that I don't see it, but that's because my glasses aren't sufficiently focused. What we're going to do right now is to go through 3 specific examples. We're going to work through 3 cases which seems so dysfunctional, so opposed to the garden. 3 parts of our real lives, of our reality, that seem to be void of the presence of God. And we will find the goodness within them. And they are the following 3: sin, hardship, and suffering. In the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to help you experience 3 paradigm shifts in these 3 areas. In sin, the dysfunction within us. Hardship, the dysfunction outside of us. And suffering, even more the dysfunction or outside of us. To change the way that we deal with the things that hurt us most. That's our goal here tonight. You see, when we think of the sin, when we think of the evil inclination within us, that God created the evil inclination within us, we say, how can this world be a garden? How can this world be orderly, beautiful, coordinated, carefully planned, when we see such harmful forces within each and every one of us? God created us with a sense of evil and an inclination towards evil, what we call the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. How can the evil inclination be good? How can the evil inclination be a part of God's garden? And indeed, friends, this is the question that the Hasidim asked of the Rebbe in 1972 when the Rebbe introduced this groundbreaking concept. I just want you to know, by the way, that in the very first words that the Rebbe used in 1951, when the Rebbe became leader of the Lubavitch movement, when the Rebbe accepted the position of Rebbe, his father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, the 6th Rebbe, passed away 1 year earlier in 1951 on the 10th day of the month of Shvat. It took an entire year of begging and pleading and pestering for the Rebbe to accept finally the mantle of leadership, for the Rebbe to accept the position of Rebbe. And when the Rebbe accepted the position of Rebbe, it was with these words of King Solomon that we just mentioned. I've come to my garden, my sister, my bride. This world is not a jungle. What you see is not what you get. This world is perfectly consistent with the will of God. If you think this world is conflicting with God, if you think this world is conflicting with Torah, with the will of God, then you need to get your eyesight adjusted. That was the message that the Rebbe began his extraordinary leadership, his 44 years of leadership on this earth, was with these words: Basi legani achesi kalo. This world is a garden. This world is perfectly consistent with the will of God, even though it doesn't look like it. This world is not a jungle. And we tonight again explain how that's possible. So how is it possible that this world, that the evil inclination within us is consistent, is part of the garden of God? How can it be that the evil within us, the dysfunction, the ego, the insatiable ego within us, the temptation, the sin, the seduction, the dysfunction within each and every one of our souls, how can that be part of this garden which God created? This was the question that the Hasidim asked of the Rebbe in 1972 when the Rebbe said this beautiful talk. And the Rebbe's response was to refer back to the book of Genesis when God created the world. Our sages, the Talmud tells us, remember when God said and he saw that the world was good? And God saw everything that he had created, and behold, it was very good. It was very good. So the Talmud says, good, this is a reference to the good inclination. Very good. That is a reference to the evil inclination. Not only is the good inclination obviously a part of God's garden, of God's order in this world, but even the evil inclination is also a part of God's order, of God's garden, of God's order in this world. How is that possible? How could it be that the evil inclination is very good? It sounds ridiculous. So whilst the Medrash gives us a shallow interpretation which says that the evil inclination drives us, gives us ambition, ego is self-preservation. It drives us forward to build and to grow and to aspire and to dream and to achieve. The Rebbe says that not only is the result, is the consequence of the evil inclination good, but the evil inclination in and of itself, the ego within ourselves, the dysfunction inside each and every one of us is also part of God's garden. How? You see, when we think for a moment, when we stop for a second and we think about why God created this world in the very first place, this will fall into beautiful, sharp focus. If God is master of the world, why did he create us? For what reason did God create us, puny human beings? For what reason? Our sages tell us a magnificent piece of information. This comes from the Tanya, from the Alter Rebbe, quoting the Medrash, which is the oral law given to Moses at Mount Sinai. He says, the purpose of this world's creation is God's desire to have a home in this lowest world. You see, for God to be recognized as master of the universe in a world of angels is really not a big deal. God wanted to create a world where he was hidden. A world where we struggle, we oscillate between good and evil, selfish and mission-oriented. A world where we struggle with evil impulse, with temptation, with seduction. In such a world where godliness is not apparent, where godliness is concealed, in such a world, God desired to be recognized as master of the universe. The purpose of this world's creation is God's desire to have a home in the lowest world. God deliberately needed to create a world in which he was hidden, so that we would have freedom of choice. We would have to really think whether we believe in God, whether we want to have anything to do with God, whether we want to follow our selfish impulse, whether we want to binge watch on Netflix all day, or whether we want to do a mitzvah, whether we want to go to shul, lay tefillin, help a fellow Jew, give tzedakah. Where we struggle with ego, self-centered versus God-centered. And we struggle because God is hidden. It was in this world that God wanted to be crowned as king. This is the doctrine of Dira B'Tachtonim, a home in the lowest world. Now, it's not possible for God to have a home in the lowest world unless God is hidden. It's not possible for God to have a home in the lowest world unless there is ego, unless there's an evil inclination, unless there's dysfunction. Turns out that upon closer analysis, our evil impulse is actually the props that set the stage for our performance as the chosen people. We were created in order to show our loyalty, to pledge our allegiance despite all odds in this lowest world. But we could never do that unless we were stacked, the odds were stacked against us, unless God was hidden, and unless we were drawn to temptation and to sin and to evil and to reject God. The evil impulse is therefore very, very much a part of God's garden, because without the evil impulse, we could never fulfill the purpose for which we were placed into this world. You know, in the NBA, the National Basketball Association, it would be no fun if you had no team to play against. Imagine if all the teams were on the same side. It would be no fun. What's the point if all the basketball teams, all the baseball teams were on the same side? It's only because we're fighting against each other. When Liverpool plays Manchester United, when the Red Sox play the Yankees, that's when we're able to have some thrill and some excitement from the opposing teams. Imagine a father who's playing basketball with his son. What does the father want? Does the father want to beat the son in basketball? No. The father wants the son should win against him. But in order to bring out the talent of the son, the father's going to put up a fiery battle. That's why God created us in such a way that we would have an opposing force, something that leads us towards dysfunction, something that leads us away from God, towards temptation and seduction and to sin, because that is what's going to allow us to overcome, to be in what we call tachtonim, the lowest world, so that in the lowest world, the stage has been set for us to choose right over wrong, to choose blessing over curse, Torah over selfishness, to be able to make for God a home in this lowly physical world. Like the father playing against the son, the father wants the son to win, but he's going to put up a good fight so that the son will be able to express himself in the best way possible, to bring out his best talent. So to the evil inclination is only here to test us. That's its entire purpose. You know, the Tanya brings out a beautiful analogy of the evil inclination within us as a hired whore. It's a prostitute that was hired by the king in order to test the mettle of the crown prince. Will the crown prince be able to overcome seduction and temptation or not? Now the whore, the prostitute, is a loyal servant of the king, but she knows that the king wants her to throw all of her talents against the prince. She knows that her purpose is only to test the king. She hopes to test the prince. She hopes that the prince will prevail over her and not fall for her seduction. But with this perspective, when we're able to see that God, remember that one paradigm shift we mentioned at the beginning of this class? We said that God is good and God is ever present. It's the doctrine of a perpetual creation. When we realize that God is engaged with this universe at every single moment in time, we realize that even the dysfunction within us is part of God's garden. The purpose, the reason why He created us was in order to make for Himself a home in this lowest world, in this world where He is hidden. God could not have had a lowest world, a tachtonim, a world where God is hidden, if not that we were drawn towards seduction and temptation, if not that we were drawn towards the hired whore, the prostitute, that tries to lead us astray, but her intent is that we should prevail over her. And that, my friends, is the first of 3 dysfunctions in our life in which we can find the goodness. From at the outset, at face value, the evil within us seems contrary, seems in total conflict to God. But when we realize, when we're imbued and permeated with the awareness that God is present in every single aspect of this universe, even within the evil within us, we realize that the evil within us is a prop, like a movie scene that's there to allow the movie to take place and to sell millions and millions of copies. So God created the evil within us in order to allow us to fulfill our purpose in this universe. The evil, the dysfunction was created so that the stage would be set for us to be able to fulfill the reason why we were created. Seeing the garden within the sin and immorality around us isn't just about rose-colored glasses, friends. It's about the ability to put the glasses on in the first place, to be able to see what lies beneath the surface, what lies beyond what our eyes see initially, to be able to recognize and be imbued with the awareness that God is present everywhere. This is the teaching that the Rebbe was telling us in 1972, and indeed in 1951 in his opening statement. The Rebbe said this world is a garden. God is present all the time. The landscaper is here. The architect, the designer is here all the time. There is no place of this universe that is void of God, not even the evil within us. Which leads me to the second of 3 dysfunctions in our lives, where we're trying to find the goodness in the world around us. Our goal tonight in Lesson 1 of Paradigm Shift is to see the good in everything, to be able to see how this chaotic universe is really a chorus, is really perfectly aligned with the presence of God, how God, the conductor of the universe, is present in every single moment, in every single experience and encounter. When we're imbued with the doctrine of perpetual creation, when we realize that God is ever present, and God is always good, obviously, we realize that what we see is not what we get, that the world looks like a jungle, but really, it's a majestic garden. So we spoke about sin, temptation, the evil within us. But now let's go a little deeper, a little bit more personal. Let's talk about challenge. Let's talk about hardship. Let's talk about the obstacles that come in our path. How can they be good? If you're experiencing a problem in your life, how can that be part of God's garden? Can the challenges in your life, can the obstacles that stand in your path, can they also be good? Can you find serenity and peace within the challenges that stand in your way? Let's take a case study from the Bible, from Genesis, the book of Bereshit, Jacob. Our forefather Jacob, one of the patriarchs of the Jewish people, worked nights like days. For 20 years actually, he worked to be able to earn the right to marry his wives, Rachel and Leah, for his very wicked father-in-law, Lavan. It's a beautiful story in the book of Genesis, right in the middle of the book of Bereshit. And we find that Jacob was constantly being deceived by his father-in-law, by Lavan. Yet, despite all of the deception and the lies and all the horrible problems that he faced, we find that Jacob actually sang while he was being abused. While his father-in-law, Lavan, was abusing him and taking advantage of him and stealing and robbing him, Jacob actually sang Shir HaMa'alot, the song of ascents. How is it possible to sing through your troubles? Can you sing through your challenges? Can you be like Jacob? Can you be deceived for 20 years and still be singing? Let's take a look at how the Rebbe puts it. Jacob's challenging stay in the house of his father-in-law of Lavan was for the purpose of great gain, in order that he should become, as Genesis 30 states, exceedingly wealthy. Jacob perceived the purpose of the challenge, the profit it would subsequently bring him, and was therefore able to sing whilst in the house of Lavan a song of ascents. See, my friends, Jacob knew that God is ever present in every single moment in time. Jacob knew that God is good and God is always present. Therefore, any problem that he was facing was going to lead to a greater good. You see, if we have a short-sighted perception of reality, if we're myopic, nearsighted, then we only see the problem. But if we're like the Rebbe, broad-minded, we can experience a paradigm shift by saying, God is present in every single moment. And if we can see the presence of God, at least in our mind's eye, in every single moment, then every challenge that we face, we know is for a greater good. Just like the bow and arrow, when you pull the bow backwards, away from the target, it's in order to give it the strength and the energy to propel stronger towards the target. So too, Jacob knew that the reason that he was experiencing hardship was only because this was going to lead him closer to his destiny. And indeed, Jacob intuitively knew, he perceived the purpose of the challenge, the profit that it would subsequently bring him, and therefore he was able to sing. Jacob knew that he was going to become the namesake of our people. Bnei Yisrael, the people of Israel. This is Jacob's second name, sons of Jacob. He knew that he was going to give birth to the 12 tribes of Israel. He knew that he was going to experience tremendous wealth and great spiritual growth as a result of the hardship that he was experiencing during those 20 years working for his father-in-law. Because Jacob knew that since the conductor is always present, God, who is always only good, therefore the chaos, what looks like chaos, is really a chorus. He knew that our challenges are there only to bring us to greater good. Let's take a look at how the Rebbe says these words. Because of the advantages that ensue from struggles and challenges, at times, God orchestrates opponents that attempt to battle us and to disturb our divine service. Again, because of the advantages that ensue from struggles and challenges at times, God orchestrates opponents that battle us, that attempt to battle us and disturb our divine service in order to bring out a greater good within us. Upon experiencing such adversity, we respond like Jacob by singing a song of ascents. The difficulties do not impede our service or cause it to flag. To the contrary, They evoke extra energy and courage. They cause us to sing. You see, it's the believer, it's the chassid, the Rebbe's student, who's able to experience the paradigm shift to know that what I see is not what I get. It looks like a jungle, but really it's a garden, because God is ever present based upon the doctrine of perpetual creation. I know that there's a fruit in here somewhere. I just got to dig deeper if I don't see it yet. And if it looks like a challenge, if it looks like a hardship, if it looks like a crisis, it means that there's greater good that lies behind this. Every setback is actually the backswing of the golf club that gives you the momentum to reach your goals. This, my friends, is what I'm going to call the goodness doctrine. That God is always present. God is only good. And therefore, when God gives us a challenge, it's only in order to bring out a subsequent good that follows. We rise only as much as we have previously fallen, just like a roller coaster. The more you go down is just as much as you go up. What crashes down must eventually rise again, and that's what Jacob knew. Jacob realized that our troubles are divine gifts that bring out the best in us. It was his father-in-law Lavan and the deceit of the residents of Haran that brought out the fire in him, that brought out the best in him to be able to allow him to give birth to the 12 tribes of Israel and to develop this extraordinary Jewish people, which were the result of Jacob's suffering. You know, in Hebrew, in the Holy Tongue, the word crisis is a beautiful word. The word crisis is mashber. Mem shin bet resh. Mashber, but it also means a birthing stool. The word crisis, mashber, also means a birthing stool, which is the very word that Pharaoh tells the Jewish midwives in Egypt that on the birthing stool they should kill the kids that are being born. On the mashber. What a fascinating word. The word crisis and the word birthing stool being exactly the same word. The reason why this is in Hebrew, in the Holy Tongue, is because it explains to us the soul, the purpose, the essence of our challenges. Our challenges at face value look like problems, but really they're there in order to bring new life, extraordinary joy and happiness that we never even dreamed possible. I just want you to allow this to sink in for a moment, friends. Just allow this idea to sink in. That when you're imbued and permeated with the awareness that God is present in your life at every single moment, you realize that all the bad things that happen to you, all the challenges that you experience, are there in order, or are there by divine design. They're there to allow you, like Jacob, to bring out the best in you, to, like a roller coaster that's going down in order to rise up. The challenges you face are there in order to bring out talents that you never even dreamed possible. You know, an example of this would be the butterfly. When the butterfly, the worm, is in the cocoon, eventually it metamorphoses into a butterfly. When the butterfly is ready to come out of the cocoon, it has to schwitz and kvetch and push to get out of that cocoon. Now, when you're looking at the butterfly, which is struggling to get out of that cocoon, you might want to bring your fingers in to allow the butterfly to get out of the cocoon and to be able to fly. Why does it have to work so hard? But scientists have discovered that it's the schlepping and the kvetching and the pushing of the butterfly to open the hole in the cocoon that forces the blood into its wings that allows the butterfly to fly. And in fact, if you will take away the struggle of the butterfly, if you will put your hands in there and open up the cocoon and the butterfly will fall to the ground, it will never fly again, because it's the challenge of breaking out of the cocoon that forces the blood into its wings. If you give the butterfly the luxury of not needing to break out of its cocoon, then that butterfly will fall to the ground, it will never be able to fly again, and it will die of starvation. We see the story throughout the Torah. Think of Joseph. Joseph, the favored son of Jacob, He went through one crushing, humiliating defeat after another. He was hated by his brothers, and then he was sold into slavery. They tried to kill him. And then he was almost seduced by his master's wife, and he was thrown into the dungeon. He went from the fire to the frying pan, from bad to worse. And each time that Joseph falls into a lower state, he's preparing himself to rise to his meteoric rise to power, to become the prime minister of the world's superpower at that time. You know, in 1987, when the Rebbe experienced a difficult court case that went before the courts, there was a famous story of the Rebbe's nephew who was stealing books from the Rebbe's library. And at that time, there was an accusation. Eventually, the Rebbe won the court case, and the books were returned to Lubavitch, to the Chabad Lubavitch World Archive. But at that time, there was an accusation that the books of the Rebbe, of the previous Rebbe really, were private property because the Hasidim, the students of the Rebbe, the followers of the Rebbe, were inactive. And after winning the court case in the courts, the Rebbe explained that perhaps the whole reason that we had to suffer through the trauma of a court case, of reclaiming the books that belong to the Chabad Lubavitch World Archive, is in order for us to face that accusation. That we should be told that Chabad is inactive, so that we should double and redouble and intensify our efforts to be able to be active on a whole new level. So the Rebbe, who experienced personal hardship in this court case, it was his father-in-law's prized possessions of the holy books that were being potentially seized by a private individual, something that the Rebbe really took very personally. The Rebbe interpreted this hardship as an opportunity and an impetus for greater growth, to be able to inspire us to prove that we are active Hasidim, that the Chabad Lubavitch is active and alive and more busy than ever before. You know, great athletes are motivated only by the skill of the opposition. If you didn't have an opposition on the other side, if you didn't know how good the other team was, then you'd never be motivated to train so hard. It's the challenges that we face that bring out the best within us. And that perspective is only possible when you're imbued with the awareness that there is a conductor to this orchestra, that there is a designer to what seems to be like chaos, that the challenges that we face are really divinely ordained to bring out the best in us. And thus, my friends, we're able to reach a conclusion that even the challenges that we face are also part of God's garden. They're not dysfunctional. They're not part of the jungle. The challenges that we face are really there in order to force us, like the butterfly breaking out of the cocoon, to force the blood into our wings, to bring gifts and talents and strengths that we never even knew that existed between us. If we never faced, that existed within us. If we never faced any struggle, we would never have to prove ourselves. If life was so simple. And that's why, my friends, we're experiencing tonight this paradigm shift on 2 of 3 levels. 3 parts of our lives that seem so chaotic: sin, hardship, and suffering. We spoke about how sin is part of God's garden because we would never be able to set the stage of making a home for God in this lowly world if not for the temptation for sin. And now we explain how struggle as well is also part of God's garden, because when we realize that God is in charge of the universe at all moments in time, at every single moment in time, it's then that we realize that the challenges that we face are also a part of God's divine design to bring out the best in us. And this, by the way, was something that the Rebbe took for granted. Whenever somebody came to the Rebbe with problems, with challenges, the Rebbe would say to them, the fact that you have a challenge means that you've got to solve this riddle to bring out something hidden within you. There's a famous story about the first black congresswoman in America. Her name was Shirley Chisholm, that was assigned by forces that didn't appreciate her presence to the Agricultural Committee of the U.S. Congress, even though she was in Brooklyn, where there's no agricultural farms. And when she stood before the Rebbe said to her, "Don't look at this like a problem, there's a solution. Think about it, you've got so many poor mothers. You've got so many people that can't afford food. And if you're in charge of the Agricultural Committee, Maybe you can find a way to bring food from the surplus of American farms in the Midwest to bring them to the poor mothers and babies in Brooklyn. And that's how the WIC program and the food stamp program began. Shirley Chisholm, the first black U.S. Congresswoman, said that if there's mothers in Brooklyn that are able to give milk to their children when they can't afford it, it's because of the Rebbe, who was able to understand that there is no such thing as a problem. There's only the solutions that the problems lead us to. You know, when you look at the videos of the Rebbe's Farbrengens, you'll notice that the Rebbe always encouraged joy and dancing at the Farbrengens. He always wanted people to be happy. Perhaps the reason is because the Rebbe wanted us to be uplifted, to be able to see the higher perspective. When we see life's burdens for what they truly are, we burst into song and joy. If we're coming from a place of darkness, we'll look at the problems at face value. But when we're joyous, when we're upbeat, when we're positive, when we're happy, we're able to look at the problems and see them from a higher perspective, to see them within the context of God, the master of the universe, the conductor, who's conducting this chorus as opposed to the chaos that they seem to be at face value. And this now, my friends, leads me to the final point of our lesson tonight, which is the third of the three seemingly ungodly parts of our lives, the seemingly dysfunction parts of our lives, and that is suffering. Could it be that this world is not a jungle but a garden, a carefully, beautifully manicured garden where God is ever present in every single moment when we suffer? How can our suffering be consistent with the presence of God? This is an ambitious topic for us to experience a paradigm shift tonight, but let's try it out. I hope that you'll bear with me here for a few moments. For starters, we have to recognize that we are mere mortals. And just like the chess piece cannot ever attempt to fathom the profundity of the wisdom of the chess master, so too we as creations cannot attempt to fathom the wisdom of our maker. We have to recognize our limitations and to say that we don't understand the wisdom of our Creator. We believe that He sent us suffering for a purpose. We believe that God is good, even though we can't understand it yet. It's okay if we don't understand. At least we know that God is good. God is coordinating every detail of this world, including the suffering within us, which is coming from God's goodness. We just don't understand how God's goodness could lead us to a state of suffering. But once we come in with an attitude of compassion, we can reassess the suffering in our lives. You know, we often make the mistake of what we call the broken tile syndrome. You know, if you look up at a ceiling, a beautiful ceiling in a room, and there's one broken tile and 99 beautiful tiles, what do you see? We'll typically see the one broken tile. Even though it's 1% of all the tiles of the ceiling, the one broken tile is the one that everybody seems to see. You know, there's a story of a professor who drew a black dot on a page, and he asked the students, what do you see? And every single one of them said, I see a black dot. The professor was frustrated at the end when he said, why did nobody say that I see a white page with a black dot? We always see the stain. We don't see the purity, the innocence, the beauty. The broken tile syndrome is a human consciousness that causes us to always look towards the problem. But when you think about it, we realize that the dysfunction, the suffering in this world is very, very, very much within the minority. You know, the dysfunction in this world, the good far outweighs the bad in this world. Maimonides clearly tells us that even though we might see dysfunction within this world, evil is not found amongst the angels, the spheres, the stars, the elements, and that which is formed of the elements, minerals, plants, and various species of living beings. Evil is very, very much the exception, not the rule. And even when it comes to illness, think about it. How many healthy babies are there compared to ill babies? There are far more healthy babies than there are unhealthy ones. It's my aunt who says that the miracle of a healthy baby never gets old, right? There's far more safe flights than airline crashes. There's far more safe car journeys than there are car crashes. Yet we tend to always focus on the airline crash, on the car crash, on the unhealthy baby. But if we put things into context, we realize that the suffering is really very, very much in the minority. Even when it comes to suffering that's not God-made, but even man-made suffering, we realize that human violence is also very rare, and the vast majority of mankind lives in peace. And it's Maimonides who makes an observation, an extraordinary observation, that our most urgent needs are free and plentiful. Like air and water is free and plentiful. But it's the things that we need less, like diamonds and gold and silver, those are the ones that are more rare. Because God created this world in such a way that suffering is actually the exception, even though with our broken tile syndrome, we tend to focus on the problem, even though it's only 1%, rather than focusing on the 99%, which is functional. The old saying goes that bad news is, we report only the bad news, right? The newspapers love to report the bad news. Why? Because if it bleeds, it reads. You're not going to read in the newspaper about how many people are overcoming coronavirus and how many people are alive and well. You only hear about how many people are dying from coronavirus. And the reason is, if it bleeds, it reads. Bad news gets halfway across the world before good news even gets its boots on. So there is evil, there is suffering in this world, but it's very, very much the minority. And that's an important perspective. So whilst we express compassion to the suffering, we realize that the suffering in this world is very much the minority. And don't lose sight of the garden, because there are some weeds in the garden. But here we come to the crux of our discussion tonight. And that is, what about the sufferer himself? Okay, so we say that the person that's suffering is the exception. So what about the person that has a child who's not well? That person, who might be the exception of mankind, but still, what about that person that's suffering right now? How can that person see the garden, the presence of God, within this suffering that they're experiencing? And here the Rebbe gives us this beautiful paradigm shift where the Rebbe tells us, don't allow your problems to define you, because your destiny is so much greater than your problems. Don't define yourself by your deficiencies. Rather, you should define yourself by your destiny. See, the Rebbe explains that we all have good and bad in our lives. Every one of us has good and bad in our lives. And we have a choice about whether we want to emphasize the good or whether we want to emphasize the bad. Right? Take a look at this letter that the Rebbe wrote. I acknowledge receipt of your letter despite its tone and content. I have not, God forbid, lost hope that eventually you will appreciate the good in life, including the good in your own life, and that this appreciation will impact your emotions and frame of mind. In our world, everything is a mixture of good and bad. Human beings must choose which aspects they will emphasize, contemplate, and pursue. In everyone's life, there are two paths, to see the good or to see the opposite. And now the Rebbe brings a beautiful example, how instructive it is when our sages tell us that Adam was an ingrate. Adam was ungrateful. Why? Even before he was banished from the Garden of Eden, when living in literal paradise, he complained about his circumstances. He blamed his wife for feeding him from the tree of knowledge. On the other hand, there were Jewish men and women who thanked and blessed the Creator and recited morning blessings while living in Auschwitz, while living through the most horrifying times in the German concentration camps. Ultimately, everyone's circumstances will be somewhere between these two extremes of Adam, who was ungrateful in paradise, and the Auschwitz Jew, who's praising God for the goodness that he has given him. Needless to say, the Rebbe concludes, my intention is not to imply that anyone deserves suffering, God forbid. My point is simply to underscore the reality. The type of lives that we live, whether full of satisfaction and meaning or the opposite, depends in large measure on our willpower, which dictates whether we will focus on the positive or on the negative. What the Rebbe is telling us is that just like in the universe, only 1% or a very small minority is dysfunctional, is evil, is suffering, within our own lives as well, we're not either suffering or happy. We all have good and bad. Adam in the Garden of Eden had problems which he chose to emphasize, and the Jew in Auschwitz who was davening had good things that he chose to emphasize. Do you realize how much blessing you have in your life? Even if your child is not well, even if you are suffering, are you an ingrate? You know, somebody wrote a letter to the Rebbe where he said, twice in the letter, he says, I've never experienced any goodness ever. Throughout my life, I've never experienced any good. And the Rebbe wrote to him, do you realize what you're telling me? You have children. You know how many people beg, plead, and would give away everything to have children? You've got children. No, so you don't have it exactly the way you want it. Maybe you're not making enough money. But you're claiming that you don't have good in your life. You're focusing on all the negative, and you're completely ignoring the positive. My question is, how do you choose to define yourself? If you're going through some suffering in your life, if you've got weeds in your life, do you define yourself by the weeds, or do you define yourself by the garden? You know, my son, my 5-year-old son, had to go to the dentist recently, and as I took him to the dentist during the pandemic, he says to me, Tati, when can we go to the dentist? Please, can we have my tooth pulled? And I couldn't believe it. This 5-year-old was here. He was begging me to take him to the dentist to have his tooth pulled because he realized that the momentary pain of having his tooth pulled was nothing in light of the good that was going to follow. Here was a kid, 5 years old, who chose to define himself not by the pain of the tooth being pulled, but rather by the peace of his toothache going away. See, friends, this isn't just a cute approach to hardship. It's based on a deep perception of the presence of God, the doctrine of perpetual creation in everything. This is the Rebbe's X-ray vision. You see, the logic behind it is as follows. God is good, and God is always engaged in every single aspect of our life. And therefore, the Rebbe teaches us something which I choose to call the fairness doctrine. That God is good, and God never treats us unfairly. So if God is going to cause you to suffer, it means that God is going to replenish your deficit with a surplus somewhere else. If God is going to take away something from you, it's because He's going to replenish your loss in some other aspect of your life as well. The fairness doctrine, when we realize that God is present at every moment and God is good. If you're experiencing suffering, it means, if you're experiencing a deficit, it means that you've got a surplus somewhere else. Let me explain what I'm talking about. So there's a famous story of the wounded warriors of the Israeli Defense Forces who came to visit the Rebbe. And when the Rebbe spoke to these wounded soldiers who were broken in spirit, the Rebbe said, I refuse to call them the handicapped soldiers. Rather, I'd rather call them the exceptional soldiers. You see, the Rebbe explained that if these people have lost an arm, have lost an eye, have become blind or deaf, if God has taken away part of their talents, it means perforce that He has replaced that. He's given them a surplus somewhere else more than ordinary people. The fact that they were handicapped means that they've been overcompensated with other gifts, emotional, mental, maybe spiritual, in other parts of their lives. And why should we focus on their deficiency if I can choose to focus on their surplus? Why do I need to focus on what they don't have if I can focus on what they do have? You see, the Rebbe wasn't just being nice. The Rebbe was genuinely seeking the unique gift that these people have. That's why the Rebbe refused to call handicapped kids. The Rebbe called them special children, because the fact that these children were handicapped, were missing an arm or a leg, unable to walk or talk, means that they were overcompensated somewhere else. This is the fairness doctrine, because God is present in our lives at every moment and God is good. God would never take something away from us without overcompensating for it somewhere else. Why should we focus on the problem, on the deficiency, if we can choose to focus on the surplus? The logic here is that since God is always in control and God is good, he wouldn't merely deny them what is rightfully theirs without overcompensating them in some other area. There has to be a positive side to them, to the wounded soldiers, to the handicapped kids, even if we cannot see it. And that's why, per force, if they're missing something because they're handicapped, it means they're overcompensated somewhere else. And I'd like to share with you two short stories to drive this point home. There was a woman who was about to marry off her daughter. And before the wedding, a few days before the wedding, her own mother died. And she was devastated. Why did this happen to me? That my mother died just a week before my daughter's wedding. She felt like this was the end of the world. Her suffering knew no bounds. And then the Rebbe explained to her in a beautiful letter. He said that just like when the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem, immediately after the temple was destroyed, God caused the Mashiach to be born. The Messiah was born immediately after the destruction of our temple, because the suffering of the destruction of our temple was immediately compensated by the birth of the Mashiach, which is what allowed us to cope with the suffering, knowing that our Redeemer had just been born. In just the same way that the Mashiach was born right after the destruction of the temple, so too every single time that we experience hardship and suffering, God also gives us something to allow us to cope with it. And in your case, said the Rebbe to the woman whose mother died a week before her daughter's wedding, in your case, you've been granted the gift of your mother dying so close to your daughter's wedding, so that you will be able to cope with the loss of your mother when you see Ledor Vador, when you see your mother's granddaughter marrying and being able to perpetuate her legacy by moving on into the next generation. We have a choice. When you see a problem, you can choose to see only the problem, a one-dimensional vision which is myopic, or you can choose to have a paradigm shift, to see the bigger picture, to see not the chaos but the chorus, to see the presence of the conductor within the universe, that when God takes something away from us, he overcompensates somewhere else. If he takes away your mother, it's in order to, he gives you something else to allow you to cope with that. And that is your subsequent wedding just a few days later, to allow you to heal from the loss of your mother as you see your family expanding. And that's the Rebbe's paradigm shift, to be able to see suffering within the context of the presence of God in every single aspect of our lives. You know, one final example I'd like to conclude with, something very touching, is the story of a woman who went to a Torah conclusion celebration, the signing of a Torah, the ending of a Torah writing. And she went to this Torah celebration in New York. And during the Torah celebration, she was an unmarried woman. During the Torah celebration, she had a brain aneurysm and she died on the spot. Now, the host of the Torah celebration, who was a physician, was devastated. And he wrote into the Rebbe, he said, how is it possible? How is it possible that this woman who came to my Torah celebration would die at the Torah celebration? How could it be? Why am I being punished? Why am I being made to suffer that she should die during my celebration? And once again, the Rebbe's approach here was a paradigm shift, to turn the chaos into chorus by the presence of the conductor. The Rebbe writes, may I suggest the following. Were the deceased not invited to the Torah celebration, she would have suffered her fatal attack in a very different setting. You know, we only have limited time to our lives. There's only so much life that each and every one of us was given. Her death was not your fault. It was the end of her clock. Her time ran out. Perhaps she would have died in the street or in the presence of strangers. She would have been deprived of the comforting presence of a physician, you, who was also a dear friend of hers and shared her religious values. In her final moments, she would have not heard the words of encouragement, nor she would have been surrounded by her friends or her co-religionists. The vast difference between these two possible scenarios is self-understood. Moreover, the Rebbe said, consider how significant are the last moments of a dying person. Think about it. If you could choose how you die, would you like to die surrounded by friends and family? Or would you like to die in a sterile hospital room, ICU, all by yourself? Of course, you want to be surrounded by family and friends, by people that love you. Based on the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov regarding divine providence, it is possible that one of the true reasons why God inspired so-and-so to donate the Torah in the first place was to allow for the tranquil ascent of this young woman's soul, and that it should occur in a Jewish home, a home that displays and is protected by a mezuzah, whose first words are, Hear, O Israel, Shema Yisrael, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. What the Rebbe was saying was 3 points. Number one, we cannot fathom the wisdom of our Creator. We also don't know the time when a person dies, so we can't explain the death. The death is the death. Everybody dies at some point. It's not your fault. But then the Rebbe explained the time's up doctrine, which is that when a person runs out of time, they run out of time. It's not your fault. Don't take it personally. Time's up is time's up. If she wasn't going to die during your Torah celebration, she would have died in the street, or she would have died somewhere else. When her time was up, her time was up. But the Rebbe was pointing out what a special way to die. Perhaps the entire reason for the event was to allow this precious soul to have the most beautiful death, the most beautiful transition from this world to the next. And this is only possible. This way of looking at suffering is only possible when you're imbued and permeated with the awareness that God is the master of the universe. God is the conductor of the orchestra. At all times, God is ever present and God is good. It's then that we're able to see that even the suffering in our lives, the parts that we don't understand, because we cannot plumb the depths of the wisdom of our Maker. But even the suffering in our lives is there to bring out something good. You've got to keep on digging. If you haven't found the good within the suffering, it's only because you haven't dug deep enough. Friends, I know this is difficult. I know this is deep. But this is something profound. You can choose. You can choose if you want to identify with your suffering, or you can choose to identify with your surplus. Remember that God is as the master of the universe. God is good and ever present. He gives us the fairness doctrine. When He takes something away from us, He gives us a surplus. You can choose, like Adam, to emphasize the one problem in your paradise, or you can be like the Jew in Auschwitz, who emphasizes the one good thing in his living hell. We can choose to identify by the weed in our beautiful garden, or we can choose to identify by the beautiful landscaping, which also has a few little weeds. You can be like my little Mayor, my son, my 5-year-old, who chose to identify with the peace of mind of no toothache, or you can choose to identify with the pain that the pulling of the tooth incorporates. It's our choice. You can choose to identify with the broken tile syndrome, with the problem, or you can choose to identify with the good, the vast majority of good that's going on as well. Because of the fairness doctrine, every deficiency that we suffer, the handicapped soldier, the handicapped child, is given a surplus, some positive aspect, which is why the Rebbe called them the exceptional soldiers and the special children, to be able to see the extraordinary blessing. When you see a problem, dig deeper. Don't be myopic. Don't be short-sighted. Don't experience tunnel vision. Step back. See the bigger picture. See the presence of God all around you and say, God is good. God could not possibly have given us something which is exclusively bad. There's got to be something good over here. I mean, think about this pandemic for a moment. Yes, there's all sorts of problems with this pandemic. But how much good has come out of this quarantine? For us to be able to connect with our loved ones, to talk to them, to engage with them, to connect with them, to look at them in the eye, to have so much free time, no more events to run to, no more social engagements. We can just talk to our loved ones. Look how much good has come out of this. You can choose if you want to focus on the negative or if you want to focus on the positive. If you want to be the ingrate Adam in the Garden of Eden, or if you can be the grateful Auschwitz Jew even in the living hell. Friends, I want to wrap this up here by saying, to answer your question, Robin, tips for training ourselves to always see the good. Good question there. I'd like to conclude and say, we're living in a garden. This is our first paradigm shift here tonight. The world looks like a jungle, but what you see is not what you get. You got to look deeper. You got to put on your X-ray vision to be able to have proper focus in your glasses, to see the garden which lies beneath the apparent jungle. The Rebbe is not being naive. The Rebbe is being incredibly deep and real to the core of truth. We need to work to be able to see the garden today. To be able to do that, I'd like to encourage you to do the following. Number one, think about the dysfunction in your life. Think about the problems, whether it's inner dysfunction, challenge yourself to identify the dysfunction within your garden. But first you have to embrace the reality that God is everywhere and that God is good. With that approach, you can approach your dysfunction as follows. If it's an internal dysfunction, then you know that the internal dysfunction is there. Your child abuse, your baggage, your syndrome, your attachments, your problems, your addictions, your struggles are there to set the stage for your performance. And if it's an external struggle, if it's an external dysfunction, like struggle or suffering, then embrace the fairness doctrine. Embrace the notion that God is good and that God replenishes every deficit with a surplus. And when you realize that every deficit is replaced with a surplus, that every wounded soldier has extraordinary sensitivity or vision in some other part of their lives. They might not be able to see, but they've got vision in other areas of their life. That every handicapped child has an extraordinary empathy or spiritual connection or some other access that normal people don't have. When we realize that every deficiency comes with a surplus, we can choose to define ourselves by our blessing instead of our bad fortune. Friends, let's make sure to see the garden and never to get lost in the weeds. I'm Rabbi Dovid Vigler from Chabad Palm Beach Gardens, and I want to thank you for joining me here tonight for Lesson 1 of Paradigm Shift, as we redefine the world and the seeming dysfunction which comes with it. I hope that tonight you've been able to be inspired to change your glasses, to realize that what you see is not what you get. You got to get better vision, better glasses to be able to see the presence of God within everything, and how the good God, the exclusively good God, will never torture us. Any hardship he sends our way is to bring out the best in us. And any suffering he sends our way is only in order to be able to give us surplus in other areas of our lives, even if we cannot always understand it. There are weeds in the garden, but I don't define myself by my weeds. I define myself by my garden. Next week, we're going to redefine the Jew, having the courage to truly face our deepest selves and see ourselves deeper than we ever realized possible. I'm Rabbi Dovid Vigler of Chabad Palm Beach Gardens. Check us out on youtube.com/Jewish Gardens or facebook.com/Jewish Gardens. I'd love to hear your feedback and thoughts. Send me an email to rabbi@jewishgardens.com. That's rabbi@jewishgardens.com. Or friend us at facebook.com/Jewish Gardens for daily Torah study classes. Thank you for joining us here tonight. Shalom, and have a wonderful Shabbat.